The call came in at 3:17 a.m. and the dispatcher's voice was calm, but I'd been a night shift patrol officer in Harlow County for 11 years, and I knew the difference between a calm voice and a careful one. This was careful. Unit 7, we have a 1056 at the Grayson residence, 224 Sycamore Lane. Woman states her husband is missing. A 1056 is a missing person. I'd answered 100 of them. Most were teenagers who'd snuck out or dementia patients who'd wandered from a care home. But at 3:17 in the morning, with a voice that careful, I knew this wasn't either of those. I pulled up to 224 Sycamore Lane, a neat, two-story colonial with a pristine lawn and a porch light that cast a sickly yellow glow over the front steps. The woman who answered the door was named Claire Grayson. She was in her mid-30s, wearing a bathrobe that looked expensive, and her hands were shaking as she held a mug of tea she never drank from. "He went out to take the trash," she said, her voice thin. "That was 3 hours ago." The trash cans were still at the curb. She'd shown me the empty kitchen, the cup of decaf coffee still warm on the counter, the TV playing a muted crime drama. His car keys were on the hook by the door. His phone was on the charger, still at 82%. "He didn't take his phone?" I asked. She shook her head. "He never does. He says it's his one escape." I checked the backyard with my flashlight. The grass was damp with night dew, and my boots left dark prints in the blades. The yard was enclosed by a 6-foot wooden fence, and the gate was latched from the inside. Nothing was disturbed. No footprints but mine, no signs of a struggle. It was as if the man had simply stepped out the back door and evaporated. I called it in. We searched for 3 days. Cadaver dogs, drones, the county sheriff's helicopter. We dragged the pond at the end of the street, even though it was only 3 feet deep. We interviewed every neighbor on Sycamore Lane, all of whom described the Graysons as a lovely couple who kept to themselves. No one saw anything. No one heard anything. The case went cold on day 4. Claire Grayson moved out of the house 2 weeks later, and the property sat vacant for 6 months before a young couple with a golden retriever bought it at a steal. And that should have been that. Except it was. I'm telling you this because I know you want a story. You want something that will make you feel that prickle at the back of your neck, that moment of suspended breath. And I'm going to give it to you. But before I do, I need you to understand something. I was a cop. A good one. I don't believe in ghosts or demons or anything that goes bump in the night. I believe in evidence. I believe in timelines. I believe in the human capacity for cruelty and the even greater human capacity for self-deception. Everything I'm about to tell you happened, and I have the photograph to prove it. Here, what you don't know. In the final weeks before he disappeared, Mark Grayson had become obsessed with something. Not another woman, not gambling, not anything a cop would normally flag. He was obsessed with a photograph. Claire mentioned it in passing during the initial interview. I almost missed it because she was mid-sob and the details seemed so mundane. "He was so excited about that picture," she had said, wiping her eyes. "He found it at his mother's house up in the attic, an old photo of his grandfather. He couldn't stop talking about it. I'd written it down, filed it, and forgotten about it. Until the anniversary of his disappearance, when I got a strange call from a woman named Sarah Whitmore. She was Mark's cousin, she said. She'd heard I was the lead on the case. She said she had something that might help. I met her at a diner on Route 9, a place with sticky tables and coffee that tasted like burnt pennies. Sarah was in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled into a practical ponytail and eyes that looked like they hadn't had a good night's sleep in weeks. She slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside was a photograph. It was an old print, the kind with a scalloped white border and a faint sepia tone. It showed a group of men standing in front of a brick building. Harvest machinery was visible in the background. A sign above the door read, "Harlow County Grain Exchange, Est 1928. My eyes went to the man in the center, tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick mustache and a confident stance. Mark Grayson's grandfather, no doubt. There was a family resemblance in the jawline and the eyes. "That's his grandfather, Edgar," Sarah said. "And those other men, they were his business partners. All of them vanished in the winter of 1934. I looked up from the photo. All of them." She nodded. 6 men walked into the grain exchange one afternoon, never walked out. The building was empty. There was a fire in the stove and a half-eaten lunch on the desk, but no sign of them, no bodies, nothing. It was one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in this county back then. "I've never heard of it," I said. "You wouldn't," she said. "It was scrubbed. Edgar's wife made sure of it. She was the one who found them missing. She told everyone they'd moved out west, forged letters, forged a whole new life for herself. She was a resourceful woman, and she made her children promise to never speak of it. The family secret, she called it, the Grayson blight." I had no reason to believe her, so I did the one thing I always do when logic fails. I dug. For 3 weeks, I spent every off-duty hour in the county archives, combing through microfiche and yellowed newspaper clippings. And she was right. The Harlow County Herald from January 1934 had a small article buried on page 6 about the sudden disappearance of 6 prominent businessmen. The article was brief, without any follow-up. It was as if the story had been strangled in its crib. I found the deed to the grain exchange. It was abandoned in 1940, then purchased in 1955 by a man named Arthur Pemberton. He converted it into a restaurant. That restaurant burned down in 1987. The lot had been empty ever since. But the records office had something else. A single line in the county assessor's log from 1934, handwritten in a flowing script. "Property of E. Grayson et al., subject to estate hold." Estate hold. That meant the property technically still belonged to the descendants of the original owners, which meant that when Mark Grayson went poking around his grandfather's history, he would have found a reason to visit number 6 Harlow Road, the address of the old grain exchange, and that's where I went. The lot was a weed-choked rectangle of gravel and broken asphalt, bordered by a chain-link fence that had rusted through in a dozen places. The remains of the restaurant's foundation were still there, a cracked concrete slab that looked like a broken tooth. There was a single gnarled oak tree growing through the center of the slab, its roots splitting the concrete like veins. I walked the perimeter, kicking at debris. There was nothing here, no clue, no sign. I was about to give up when I noticed the ground. Around the base of the oak tree, the dirt was dark and rich in sharp contrast to the dry, cracked earth around it. It looked recently turned. I didn't have a shovel, but I had a tire iron from my trunk. I got down on my knees and started digging. The dirt was soft, almost loamy, and gave way easily. I dug for an hour. The hole grew to 3 feet deep. 4. That's when my tire iron hit something hard, not a rock. It was a solid metallic clang that echoed up my arm. I scraped away the dirt with my hands, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a safe. A small, fireproof safe about the size of a microwave. It had a combination dial, but the dial was rusted solid. I considered my options. I could call it in, get a warrant, have a locksmith out. But something told me as I knelt in that hole at dusk that if I left, the safe wouldn't be here when I got back. I strained against the dial, using my sleeve for grip. It fought me for 20 minutes, and when it finally gave, it gave with a sudden, brutal click that resonated in the pit of my stomach. I opened the door. Inside was a stack of letters, yellowed and tied with a faded ribbon. There was a map drawn on canvas with a red X marked in a location I didn't recognize, and there was another photograph, a newer one. It was a Polaroid of a group of men in the grainy, washed-out colors of the 1980s. They were standing in the same spot in front of the same brick building. The sign now read Pemberton's Diner. And in the center of the group, grinning at the camera, was a man who looked exactly like Arthur Pemberton. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the man standing at the edge of the frame, the one whose face was slightly blurred, as if he'd been moving. The one who was wearing a hat that was 20 years out of style and a coat that looked like it was from another era entirely. It was Edgar Grayson, the same jawline, the same thick mustache, the same confident stance from the 1934 photograph. He was standing behind the group, not quite in the picture, like a man who was only half there. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. A relative, a shadow, a trick of the light. But I knew, deep in that primal part of my brain that has kept humans alive for 1,000,000 years, that I was looking at the same man who had been in the first photograph. 50 years later, without having aged a single day. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember locking my doors or double-checking the windows. I only remember sitting at my kitchen table, staring at those 2 photographs side by side. 1934, 1985, the same face, and then I noticed something else. In the background of the Polaroid, in the window of the diner, there was a reflection. It was faint, but it was there. A figure standing inside. A man in a uniform, the uniform of a first-time deputy, though the uniform style was from the 1980s. It was the man who would have been the deputy on duty in 1985 had anyone called about the disappearance of the 6 men from the old grain exchange. But he wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at me. I know that makes no sense. I know the science says a photograph is a single moment in time. I know that. But I've looked at that image under a magnifying glass 100 times since that night. The reflection is unmistakable. And I realize now that the hole I was kneeling in next to the tree in the abandoned lot as the sun set on Harlow Road, the hole I was in was exactly the spot where Mark Grayson was standing when he vanished. The dirt had been turned. The earth was soft. It wasn't the safe that had been buried there. It was the position. I looked up from the photographs, my hands shaking to see the light in my kitchen flicker. A draft, I told myself, an old house settling. But when the light steadied, I noticed a Polaroid camera sitting on the counter beside the bread box. I had never owned a Polaroid camera in my life. I didn't want to go near it, but I did. I think you understand why. Because I need to know if it's there. I need to know if the game is real. I picked up the camera. It was heavy, cold, and smelled faintly of dust and old film. I aimed it at my reflection in the dim, dark window of my kitchen, and I pressed the shutter. The flash was blinding. The camera whirred, and a blank piece of film slid out of the bottom. I'm writing this while I wait, a timer in my junk drawer. I can see the image developing now, slowly fading in from the white void. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that the man standing in the background of this photograph is not wearing my uniform. He's wearing a hat that's 20 years out of style. And his arm is outstretched, reaching for the back of my head. I can see the grain exchange in the polished glass behind his shoulder. The lot is clean. The sign reads Harlow County Grain Exchange, Est 1928. And I'm not in the photograph yet.